All right, so we're going to talk about the first part of the skeletal system today. You are on page 27 of your notes in your binder. If you look at the beginning of your notes, you're going to see a vocab list. And the vocab is just going to have just common words that we're going to talk through and mention throughout this unit. And then if you don't know what they are, then here's your definition. So we're actually going to start right here, and you're going to fill in your notes. So we are under the skeletal system module here. So we all know that the skeletal system includes bones, cartilage, ligaments, and other connective tissue that stabilize and connect the bones. We know that ligaments connect a bone to a bone. A tendon attaches a muscle to a bone. And then we have cartilage. When we talked about tissue, we talked about cartilage. It's a connective tissue, and it's kind of got a gelatinous mix that contains fibers. So cartilage, remember, does not contain blood vessels or nerves, but it is another way of connecting two pieces together. We're going to talk about why, there isn't an article anymore, why it's important to understand what happens when a joint degenerates. And we know that the type of cartilage that we mostly care about in this class is hyaline cartilage, because it's on the ends of each bone where the joints meet together. As far as functions of the skeletal system, this is probably review. Support and structure, stores calcium, makes red blood cells. Red blood cells carry hemoglobin, which carries oxygen. Protects organs, and then also it's a leverage for muscle movement. So cartilage doesn't have nerves and blood vessels, but the skeleton, the bone tissue, actually has a ton of blood vessels and nerves. That's why if you break a bone, obviously it hurts and there's a lot of bleeding. Bones use oxygen and remove waste through metabolism, just like the rest of our body. So when we talk about the bone, one thing you're going to learn is you actually get a new skeleton every few years, and that's due to what we call is remodeling. Remodeling is a process where the minerals are constantly being recycled through the bone. So basically, you have cells called osteoblast and then osteoclast. Osteoblast, they are what's called the bone makers, and they make new bone tissue.
Mommy.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Be quiet. Okay. All right. Sorry. So the blasts make new bone tissue. The clasts actually break down that old used bone tissue, and that the more bone tissue that's broken down, it signals more osteoblasts. So the reason that osteoblasts are signaled is exercise. Exercise is important to maintain that cycle. So when you stress your bones in a good way, so just regular exercise, it stimulates the bad bone tissue to be broken down into more new tissue to be broken or to be formed. So that's why we tell even older adults it's very important to have some regular exercise for skeletal system health. As we age, though, bones do become thinner because we don't have as many blasts and we have more clast, so more bone breakdown. We do worry about the elderly because they are at more of a falls risk because they're older, they get weak, dizzy, the medications that they're on, and they're at a higher risk of actually fracturing something or breaking their bone when they fall. One of the most frequent causes of death in the elderly is a complication from a fracture. So grandma falls and breaks her hip and she dies 6 months later from pneumonia. So that's something that we always worry about with these people. We do have two different types of bone tissue. We have compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone is hard bone. The osteone, also called the bone cell, they're very tightly packed in there. It's a very strong tissue. Blood vessels fit through little tiny canals and flow through the bone. Spongy bone is a little different. Spongy bone, if you look at a picture, it looks like it's very porous. It's not as strong. And we have spongy bone at the ends of our long bones in our body. So our long bones are femur, our humerus, radius, ulna, tibia, fibula. All of those are long bones. And at the very ends, we have those spongy bone pieces. That's very important because in that spongy bone, we have what's called red marrow, which makes red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. I want to talk for just a minute about the growth plate. The growth plate is basically an open plate surrounded by cartilage. As you are still growing, like in your childhood, your growth plate is there so it can stretch, and so your bones can stretch so you can become taller and you could grow, obviously. So around early 20s, that growth plate closes, and then, you don't grow anymore. So bones can grow in diameter, meaning wider or thicker, but at some point you're not going to get any taller. So if you're 20 and you're 5 foot, you're probably not going to get any taller than that. So types of joints. Today you're going to look at a crash course video over types of joints. I'm going to go over 3 types with you. On your daily instructions, there is a reference sheet. I kind of wrote down the different types of joints, and I kind of made like a little chart for you. I'll print that out for you also. But sorry, this clock is annoying. My daughter loves cuckoo clocks, so okay. I just wonder sometimes what people think when they watch these videos, because there's just so many like random interruptions. Like it's like a fun house here. I don't know. Okay, so joints, we know what joints are. And there are actually more than 3 types, but the 3 types that I'm going to talk to you about are diarthroses, synarthroses, and amphiarthroses. And these joints are classified based on how well do they move. So a diarthrosis is a freely movable joint. So the shoulder and the hip, you'll hear later on it's a ball and socket joint because here's the ball, it goes in the socket and it can move all different ways. And amphiarthrosis is slightly movable, so your spine. So yeah, you can move your spine in a few different ways. It's just not as freely movable as like your hip would be. And then a synarthrosis is an immovable joint. So we have tiny little joints that kind of fuse together these bones in the cranium. And that would be a really good example of an immovable joint. So we're going to talk about long bone. So long bones, again, femur, humerus, radius, ulna, tibia, fibula, all of those. So the main part of the bone is called the diaphysis. Thank you.
No, it's candy.
After lunch, please.
No.
The 2 ends of the long bone are called the epiphysis. And you have something called the medullary canal. So it's in that long bone, and it's a cavity in the diaphysis, so the main part. And it contains something called yellow marrow, and that yellow marrow is just fat. So in that long bone, in the main part, you have the medullary canal, which has fat in it. So that's why we worry. If we have someone who fractured like a long bone, we also worry about an embolus made of fat flying off somewhere too. So we do worry about those things, and that's why. Red marrow is in the spongy bone part of a long bone. So it's on the ends of the bone. And red marrow you find in the vertebrae, ribs, sternum, cranium, ends of the humerus and the femur. The humerus is your main arm bone, if you didn't know. Red marrow is important because it has red blood cells, platelets, and some white blood cells. If you don't know what these cells are, you need to know, and I put that on the vocab list. Anytime we think there's a blood disorder like leukemia or cancer, we'll actually take a needle and we'll go into that red marrow and pull out some of it, and that's how we diagnose it. And we'll watch that in class as well. So these are some things that would be really important for you to look up before you leave today. Bone marrow aspiration. So that's them. Okay, sorry. That is them actually putting that needle into that spongy bone and drawing it out. It's called a bone marrow aspiration. Typically, what you're going to see is they're going to do it either in the back or on the very top of your hip bone. So I'd like for you to kind of know about this, fill it in your notes. And then we're also going to talk about layers of the bone. So layers of the bone, we have something called the periosteum, which is the outer tough membrane, has the blood vessels, lymph vessels, and the osteoblasts, the bone cells. And then this tells you what the bone cells are, the osteoblasts. And then the inner layer of the bone is called the endosteum. So that makes sense because endo means in. And that covers the medullary canal. Remember, the medullary canal has the yellow marrow and the fat in it. And then the spongy bone, which we've already talked about. All right. Oh, my. Okay. So we're stopping here because you have a crash course over a lot of different types of joints that I really want you to focus on and pay attention to. Make sure you have filled in your notes and make sure you look at what a bone marrow aspiration is.